Hello, my creative friend. Do not forget that on Wednesdays we have bite-sized videos, a dose of inspiration to help you on your creative journey, aside from these longer form episodes on Mondays. And also, thank you very much for clicking that like button right now before you minimize the tab and get to your creative work. Now go create something amazing and enjoy the episode. Your Creative Push, episode 366.
The only thing more intelligent than the culture in your life is your nature. But you have to give it a chance.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Martha Beck. Martha is a sociologist, life coach, best-selling author and speaker who specializes in helping individuals and groups achieve personal and professional goals. She's been a columnist for the Oprah Magazine since 2001, and she's also been a contributing editor for several magazines, including Real Simple and Redbook. And she comes on this show today for an incredible episode about the pyramid and the pool. We go many different directions, actually, but we always circle back to this idea of the pyramid and the pool. She has this wonderful video about it, which we'll link up in the show notes page today, yourcreativepush.com/366. But she describes that video in this episode, so you don't necessarily have to watch that video, but it does help to see the visuals of what she's talking about. A very powerful image, especially in today's world. But we also talk about how the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement are catalysts for global change, looking at your own suffering as a starting point in your art, and steering your life from nature rather than culture. She describes how we should trust our bodies to direct us towards our truth instead of our minds, the way in which you're serving the monster when you hustle, and what we can learn from baboons. She discusses the power of relaxing, how finding your path through life is exactly like tracking an animal, how to get the secret to actually work, and finally, how Jurassic Park changed her life. I sincerely hope that this episode affects you the same way that it affected me, in the positive way that it affected me. Since Martha and I had this conversation, I've definitely thought about life a lot differently and thought about my everyday activities and approached them in a much different way, but a much better way. So I hope that you are able to also listen to this episode and take the message to heart. So please enjoy this wonderful conversation with Martha Beck. Martha, welcome back to Your Creative Push.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you. Since you were last on the show, your episode was kind of like a hallmark episode for me. It's like the one that I refer everybody back to. And like I said before we jumped on, I feel greedy getting you back on because you've been a light in my life, at least for the past 3 years from afar, just listening to everything else you're putting out. So I really appreciate you coming on again.
Well, it's such a privilege. I have enormous respect for you. I love being on the show.
Thank you. I think a good spot to start, because for some reason I didn't see this video, which is like 3 years old at this point, I think, the pyramid and the pool. But I think that this is it was just like a profound exercise for me to watch, and especially as it relates to artists and creative people.
Right.
So could you maybe go through the pyramid and the pool and what it means for creative people? Thank you.
Yeah, I was trained as a sociologist and sort of studied socioeconomic development and was also really interested in things like changing social roles. And a long, long time ago, I thought it's generally known among sociologists that we're in a system that is basically the enemy of the human psyche. It's like ever since the Western European Enlightenment, so-called Enlightenment, we've been moving toward this sort of materialistic culture that's focused incredibly tightly on the acquisition of wealth. And what that does is it pushes people of power, people of brutal power often, up this pyramid where, well, ever since the 14th century, when the church and the state blended together to create power, you've got people at the top of this pyramid, but very few of them. And then down below, you have a broadening base of people who are doing all the work. And I was just reading about how I read an article on how Amazon workers are so overworked that they cry at their desks, both men and women, that they are exhausted by these task machines that keep them moving like robots. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos, according to this calculation, is earning $149,000 per minute.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I don't think he's carrying any packages to anyone. Anyway, that gives you an example of a pyramid, somebody at the very top who has extraordinary, meaningless amounts of wealth, and then all the way down to people at the bottom who are suffering pretty much the way peasants and ultimately slaves had to work at different points in our history. So there's the pyramid exists and it's brutal and it doesn't really serve anyone. And I, throughout my training, kept thinking, wait, what's a better way? What's a better way? And I got this image of society as a still pond where the surface of the pond is completely level and everybody is on that same plane. And into the pond are falling little droplets of water. So each of us is characterized, society is the pool, and each of us is a little stream of water, almost like a continuous raindrop going into it. And the amount of energy you put into the pool depends on the amount of sort of presence that you bring into the room. And I did a lot of research on medicine people for a book that I wrote a few years ago. And I noticed that they brought this huge amount of a kind of ineffable energy into a space, and people were very affected by it, even though they had no power, wealth, or status other than that. So I thought, okay, so maybe there will be this huge convulsion and the pyramid will be disrupted and somehow it will become the pool. And for years, I thought, how's that going to happen? And then one day I realized, wait, the pyramid is already in the pool. The pool is dissolving the pyramid from the bottom up. And so the video that you saw, I had to see it visually. So I got sugar cubes and I made a pyramid out of sugar cubes. And then I poured water around the base of the pyramid. And sure enough, it starts to dissolve from the base up. So the analogy to me is a sort of awakening that must occur to the people who are least advantaged by the system, and the people at the top of the pyramid don't even know that everything's falling apart. And I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I know eventually even the very top of the pyramid will collapse and become part of the pool. And it just felt intuitively right for me. And I was saying that art is a power that spreads that energy into the mass of the population so that it actually creates this pool that dissolves the pyramid. Now, since we last talked, two huge forces have moved, pretty violently to disrupt the pyramid. And the first was the pandemic of 2020, that has stopped the great robotic machine of capitalism, or at least slowed it way down, and gave people time to think. And then I believe this related uprising, a reckoning of people who have been disenfranchised and oppressed. And that's the Black Lives Matter movement and everything going along with it. And it's exactly what the model predicts, because it's those people at the bottom of the pyramid who are putting out these. If you read Black Lives Matter literature, there are these jewels of art and moral reasoning coming from that movement because they're so informed by the experience of oppression. So it's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very excited because if anything's going to save us from destroying ourselves, that will be it. And that is my speech. And now we can have a conversation.
No, it's an important speech, but it's funny because like I said, I don't know why it took me so long to see that video, but I think I saw it at the perfect time. It came out 3 years ago, but like you said, all of these changes that are happening as we speak, and it can be overwhelming for people who are at the bottom, at the middle, wherever you are in that kind of pyramid, even if you're trying to climb it, but it can stop you in your tracks because you don't know how to how to change that pyramid structure. And it's like
Yeah,
you think you have to like topple it from the top. You have to topple it from the top,
exactly.
but like the idea of climbing to the top and then toppling it is so overwhelming. But then just that notion, just that visual image that you share of how it's all inclusive. The only change you have to really make is in yourself, and then that
Yes.
changes the people around you. And the best way to do that is through art and expression.
Yeah, and in some people, I guess, politics is the way for some people, or I don't know, science. But for me, artistic expression is the most powerful mover of society. I mean, the economy is sort of in sociology, they say that the economy is the train track that society runs on. But art is the switchman. Art is the one that
Mm.
that decides which track the train goes on. So if you look at America prior to the Civil War, Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which now reads like a horrible racist screed, but at the time it was very anti racist, that had as much to do with fueling the Civil War as most of the political input into the system. And it really, for those of us who feel like, oh, I'm never going to make it to the top and be president and change the rules or whatever, this was a woman at a time when women weren't particularly powerful. And all she did was like write down her observations and make it an interesting story. And this huge resonance spread through the culture because it was ready for it. And she dissolved a lot of racist minds right there. So we can sit in our houses, and if we've dissolved the pyramid of power within our own minds and we've let ourselves go free, we may end up creating that resonance without even really meaning to.
Absolutely. In that video, you talk about Toni Morrison too, and
Yeah,
a quote that came from her from a different time with a different president, but
right.
just the quote that this is the time that artists go to work, and like
Yeah,
this is the time where the world and society needs us, needs creative people, and
yeah.
when you can think about that visual image, like I said, it's so much more calming to realize that really all you have to do is change yourself, and that has
Yeah,
that ripple effect through the water that you described.
right. And you can find the place to start by looking at your own suffering. Because I'll tell you one thing about this pyramid, nobody is happy within it. I just read two articles, one by a law professor and one by a doctor, both talking about how those professions basically haze people and force them to work these ridiculous hours, even when it's counterproductive. So these are high prestige professions right at the top of the pyramid, but they're still grinding people's souls. And the law professor in particular said, um, people talk about their own motivations, but what we don't say is we may have created this beast, this economy that eats people's energy, doesn't put out anything good into the universe, creates a wad of plastic in the ocean bigger than Texas, and then excretes people out the other end all used up. And at some point, you're going to feel it. It's the horrible job. It's my life is meaningless. What is my purpose? When you feel that, you're caught in the pyramid. And the way to the pool is to let go of the preconceptions and the ideas of who you're meant to be that you have learned from the culture. And people who are oppressed have more motivation to do that because it feels so obviously wrong, and they have to work their way out of what the culture is telling them about their own inferiority. But any place you're suffering, I guarantee the culture has its hooks in you, and the answer is to return to your culture and nature, right? The two opposites. You return to your true nature, and you start to do your moral reasoning from there, and you start to steer your life from nature rather than culture, and you will become free. And as you do that, another beautiful Toni Morrison quote: "The function of freedom is to free someone else." And you end up doing that in the way that's best for you. And great artists have come out of times when there's virtually no wealth. Like you look at the reggae music tradition in Jamaica, it came out of one of the worst economic slavery situations ever existing anywhere in the world. This beautiful, or American jazz, these outpourings of gorgeous art that drew people in and like changed them at a psychological level, all coming with no resources, no privileges, nothing but soul. And that gives me hope.
It gives me hope too. And it's funny too because so many people that listen to this podcast, and I'm included in this, like I have a full-time job that's still kind of a part of that machine of culture. We
Right.
talk,
Well, we all have to.
yeah. And I guess the question I have for you then is like, as people try to get back to their nature, they realize that their creative passion, the thing that they do in their free time, is the thing that they want to go towards and away from the machine.
Right.
How do you mentally switch out of that mentality that culture has told you that you're supposed to have? Like you even talked about this in your wonderful podcast, Bewildered.
Hmm. Thank you.
There's a productivity addict episode, which we'll link up in the show notes page. And who's your co-anchor on that?
Rowan Mangan.
Okay. Well, she was talking about, wanting to tick things off of her list, having this list, and she was feeling
Yeah.
productive, and she gets that dopamine hit every time she crosses something off the list. And
Right.
it's funny because I've been talking about this on my YouTube channel recently about, making a list for yourself, making a schedule for yourself, and finding those little microseconds in your free time. But there's a balance there, isn't there? Because when you
Yeah.
treat your creative passion as like this list that you got to check it off, and you fall into that mentality
Yeah.
that culture has given you, like to just hustle, hustle, hustle,
Right.
your creative passion becomes, so much worse. So what is
Yeah.
that balance?
Well, there are two errors we can make, and they're both based on our assumption that the monster is the way we survive. The monster of the sort of the socioeconomic pyramid we've created. That's our way to survive. So two things can happen. One is, as you say, putting your creative impulse and all your sort of more joyful impulses into the tiny little fragments of time that you get free from the monster, right?
Mhm.
Um, the other one is taking your art or your joy and basically prostituting it to the monster. So
Yeah.
the word you used, hustle, it's interesting. I just wrote a book where I looked up the definition of hustle, and it goes from pushing someone hard in a given direction, hurrying as fast as you can, making something of yourself in the world, swindling or cheating someone, and finally prostitution. They're all encompassed in that word hustle. So the moment you start to hustle, you know that you're serving the monster, and you have to break the basic assumption that the monster is your way to live. It's like you have to get out of the childlike idea that the monster is the parent, and you must ultimately serve it because it has all the power. Because if you start looking around the edges, it doesn't always have all the power. And my own experience coaching people and training coaches over the years is that when you start to do what you love for the joy of it. I mean, here's an example. I stumbled across all of this because I was really, really sick for like 12 years. I was in chronic pain in all my soft muscle tissue. And it was really hard for me to use my hands or stand or walk or do pretty much anything. So I couldn't really serve the monster, but I was trying to write my doctoral dissertation at Harvard by uh, taping pencils between my fingers, which did not work, and I would hit the keys of my computer with the eraser end, and I could write about a paragraph a day that way.
Wow.
And I eventually wrote a 300-page document that way. It frankly sucked. But then something happened. I thought, I want to write a novel. And it was about my son who was diagnosed with Down syndrome prenatally, but it was also about the kind of liberation from culture that I got as I started to identify more with him than with people at Harvard. So I started to work on this novel, and I did not have the time. But suddenly, when I'd open the novel as a document on my computer, I could use my hands again. Like the pain went away. And I was completely astonished by this. And it was like my body was literally forcing me away from the system and into my art. And that book became the first bestseller that I ever sold, and somehow, and basically created a life for me where I can live by doing what I want to. And by the way, this is the baby that everyone told me at Harvard was going to be the death of my career. He was. But they said it's like throwing your life away to keep this baby. It was, but the life I threw away was the pyramid that sucked. And the life I got back was one where if I follow my joy and put that into what I create, other people are so drawn to the energy of it that they pay me to write, to talk, to coach, to train. And then I've watched it happen to hundreds and hundreds of other people as I've coached them into all kinds of art. But we have to lose that basic idea that the monster is what we must serve.
And how can we use our, trust our bodies to tell us what direction to go in? Because you did go through an exercise, calming down. Like, you can still be productive, you can still get done everything on your list, but it's coming at it from like a calm place, like deep breaths and hugging yourself and calming yourself down. And then, you know what I mean? So like,
maybe
how do we...
some horse tranquilizers?
Right.
Yeah, it's that's the difference between coming from culture and coming from nature. One is the mind, the other is more the entire physiology, including the brain. In Asia, they say the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And our culture puts mind and language and culture at the apex of our directors of action, and then throws the body out the window and says that's basically stupid. In fact, while your cognitive brain is processing about 40 bits of information per second, your entire physiology is processing over 11 million bits of information per second. So what I found when it became extremely, unavoidably obvious to me that doing things that weren't right for me made me sick. Now I still have the tendency toward that, but I pick it up in the very, very early stages, and I've realized that everyone can pick it up. That's why lie detectors work. The moment we head away from something that's our truth, our muscles tense up, our breathing becomes more rapid, our heartbeat speeds up, our blink rate, we start secreting cortisol. Like the whole body shifts. And it runs on a toggle switch. Either we're in that fight or flight mentality, or we're in that's the sympathetic nervous system, or we're in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and relax. And if you come from rest and relax instead of fight or flight, you could make a radio show or a podcast on the same subject, covering the same topics, and it will have a completely different effect on the listener. It's that energy going into the pool. When it comes from mind, it's very weak, actually. When it comes from the entire psyche, it has a presence, it has a resonance that people actually feel in their bodies. So all I'd have to say to you is, like, think of something you have to do. Seriously, try it right now. Think of something you have to do later
Okay.
today.
Got it.
What is it?
It's making a
Can you tell
YouTube
us?
video. Yep.
Okay. So you're going to make a YouTube video. What's it about?
It's about scheduling. So
Ooh.
scheduling your day, scheduling your week, and scheduling your month.
All right. So think about doing that to impress a bunch of Wall Street finance dudes. Think about an audience of people from that sort of part of the pyramid, and they're looking at you, and you have to make this YouTube video about scheduling. As you hold that image, go into your body and just notice without judging or changing what you feel if you scan your body with your attention.
I feel tight. I feel like I'm going to be scorned.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And where do you feel it? In your shoulders, in your neck, your back,
in my shoulders, in my lower back, and in like my chest. Okay.
All right. So just notice that. And that's a signal from your nature. Now imagine that you're doing this you're going to go make the same YouTube video, but you're with your best friends. There are a few children running around. There are dogs and cats walking through the room. You can see green trees. You can be outside. Now think of making a YouTube video about scheduling in that environment and see how it feels.
As you were saying that, I felt like lighter. I even felt
Yeah.
like almost like something came over my head, like I became high.
Yeah. It literally, I mean, people take drugs or smoke pot or whatever to get a trace of the feeling that we get if we just set ourselves free. And I have to say that men suffer more than women in my experience from this, because this is why the pyramid is still biased toward men, which means men are a little higher in the pyramid. And the higher you get, the more captive you feel. So if a woman wanders off outside and finds a dog to play with, it's like, oh yeah, whatever. But if a man does it, it's like, why are you not working? Why are you not succeeding? Like, women could say, yeah, I'm going to take some maternity leave, and people are like, whatever. If a man says, my wife had a baby, I'm taking a month off, it's like, what? At least in the
Yeah.
US,
Yeah.
right? But just the feeling that changed, if you think about what our bodies evolved to do. When I moved to Central California, I read about what the natives of that area had done for 6,000 years before the Europeans came. They had lived by hunting, trapping, gardening, storytelling, dancing, fire making. They'd done this for 6,000 years in harmony with their environment. And what I noticed is that those are things that we do only on vacation.
Hmm.
Like, the things that they did every day when they got up and looked at their list of things to do were things that are so joyful to us innately that we do them on our vacations. We never do them any other time, especially not men.
Is
So, yeah.
Are we getting tricked, or is it just like the way that society happens?
It's the way our society happens, and there's this basic idea that everything should be this way and we're in charge. It's actually the ultimate manifestation of human ego in the Buddhist sense, the part that is the small self in the head that's constantly screaming for its own power. It knows that it's going to die. It's desperately afraid of that. And in a kind of compensation, it runs around taking stuff and overpowering people. And yeah, if you take, like, there are two types of leaders in a baboon troop. One is the bully baboon, and he basically just bites people until he's in charge. And, he's a big, strong male baboon leader. And man, I've interacted with some of those. They're scary. But then there's another kind of male baboon that can rise to the head of the troop, and he's called a friendly. And unlike the bully baboon, he spends a lot of time with every member of the troop. He'll groom members of the troop that aren't as high up in the pyramid as he is. He'll play with the little ones, which the bully baboons never do. Now, here's the deal: when the bully baboon leader starts to weaken, I mean, I really think the pyramid of power comes from our ape nature. It's just apes do it. Um, when he starts to weaken, and another male baboon grows up and gets just like 1% stronger than he is, the entire troop turns on him and drives him away. They hate him. When the friendlies are in charge, the friendlies can be so old that all their teeth have fallen out, and the entire troop will support them to stay in a position of leadership, because even the apes know that this is a better way to live. But all you need is one bully baboon to come into that scenario and start biting people. And unless the whole troop says no right at the beginning, you've got a period of tyranny coming, which, apply that to the world that we live in as you wish.
Yeah, easily applicable.
Yeah. But the sneaky thing is, like, you're obviously a friendly. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong, but you certainly come
Well,
across that
thank you,
way.
Martha.
Oh yeah, it's the greatest. And so you're doing these things, you're making podcasts, you're putting out YouTube videos. And so you have become part of the pool. And someone might look at you and say you could have used that time to, like, put on a suit and tie and go kill someone. And you're a lesser man for not having done that. But from the perspective of the pool, your willingness to walk outside the norm, your willingness to go outside and find animals or whatever it is that lights you up, right? To create music or anything, to be a medicine person. The moment you do that, you become part of the power that is greater than the pyramid. But the people above you in the pyramid will not know that. It is invisible. It doesn't show up in their field of attention. So while you may be decried as having done something less important, what you've really done from the perspective of objective reality is become much more powerful. And you have to be able to like hang in there and handle the taunting, like the people at Harvard who told me, your life is over. You've made this stupid decision. You're obviously, too young, too female, and too hormonally disrupted to see things rationally. Man, I had a professor who brought me in and told me after my son was born, he said, "Yeah, you've got to put him in an institution. You cannot raise him yourself. It will ruin your career." And a few years later, that very person slipped on a patch of ice walking around Harvard, hit his head, and spent the rest of his life immobilized in a wheelchair, unable. He could perceive and think, but he couldn't talk or operate his body. So I went to this party where everybody was announced and people would applaud, and they announced this guy and people applauded, and I looked around, and instead of this tall man walking into the room, here came a guy in a wheelchair with even his head strapped up. And everyone
Wow.
clapped for him, and he just started to cry, and tears were just coursing down his face. And I thought about that conversation we'd had and how he was learning this. Like something wanted him to figure this out, that the pool is more important than the pyramid. And geez, I found the easy way. His way was the hard one.
Wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. Stories like that, you see them and you're like, whoa, I'm going to step outside of culture and look at what's real for me
Right.
instead of what they told me.
And like you said, it's
Yeah,
not a revolution, it's a disillusion. So it
yeah,
approaching it that way, like you want to change the world. And sometimes the way to change the world is to like step outside of it and create your own. It's crazy.
yeah. Step into your own heart. You had that reaction when I said, think about this environment. So, like, the most seditious and revolutionary act you could do today is to just make that video from a state of the pool instead of the pyramid, to relax. Liz Gilbert says the most revolutionary thing, she says women, but I think it's anybody. The most revolutionary countercultural thing we can do right now is relax.
Yeah, I agree completely. And when you do relax, then you get to actually enjoy the thing you're doing, as opposed
Right.
to the hustle mentality that we were talking about. To actually, because like
Yeah.
that's the whole point at the end of the day. Especially if you do have another job and you're doing something else, like the time that you do get to spend doing your art, you shouldn't see it as like cramming it in and getting to
Yeah.
try to get it done. You should literally just be enjoying the time with yourself to express yourself and to be able to hopefully change the people around you as well.
Yeah, and do it with other people and do it in ways that are relaxed and fun. I mean, one thing the pandemic has taught me is how little we actually need. And I don't want to, I'm very aware of people who don't have enough and that this is a horrible economic downturn and people at the margins of society in, have suffered horribly. I'm not minimizing that at all. But from my own perspective, what I've seen with my middle class friends is nobody buys clothes anymore. No, we're not spending much on
Mhm.
gas. Seismologists tell us the world is quieter than it's been since they started recording things. And
Yay.
we're not hurting for lack of, like 10 suits instead of one. I've been wearing the same pair of shorts for 6 weeks. I mean, I wash them occasionally.
Your creative push confessionals.
Yes, I'm naked as we speak. No, I'm not, but I could be. We both
Yeah,
could be. Oh,
hey.
back to nature.
Exactly. It all comes full circle.
Like, what would you do? Seriously, what would you do today if we took the whole pyramid suddenly got frozen like a TV on pause, and you could actually just choose your own adventure for the day? What would you do?
I would hang out with my dogs and my wife. The I've talked about this on the show too. Like the whole coronavirus pause, like this giant pause, was like I thrived in it. And I know that
Me too.
not everybody can say that, but like just being able to have that still time where I was able to get to the podcast, get to my YouTube videos, but like not have like work, not have like the machine to go to for
Right.
9 hours, a day.
Oh,
Just be able to be
yeah.
home with my dogs and my wife and maybe watch some
Yeah.
TV, but not to have all those constant worries about, okay, where's the money going to come from?
Oh, it's horrific.
Yeah.
The provider anxiety that is created by this pyramid is so horrendous. And because, I was married to a man, but now I'm divorced and married to a woman. I sort of have experienced the provider anxiety part, and thinking, oh, I got to get out there and hustle, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But as a female myself, I've had less pressure from the culture. And so I've spent more time going outside. And just like with my dissertation versus my first novel, which became a memoir, every time I've had the courage to walk away from the machine and do what felt joyful, felt loving, felt restoring and restful for me, every single time in the long run, sometimes it took a while, I've ended up better off financially. I've ended up more able to provide for my family. But when you're in charge of the family, when you're the head of household, the courage it takes to believe that is almost superhuman, I think, for guys especially. But you kind of have to do it as a scientific experiment, see what happens. Like, have you truly been less productive since the lockdown started? Or have you been more productive?
I've been more productive.
See,
Yeah.
here's something interesting. I was reading about a doctor who went back. He was an obstetrician. He got COVID. He was sick for like a month. He went back to the hospital and he got really worried because nobody had reordered the special formula for preterm babies. So babies born early who have all kinds of physical problems, brain issues, it's all kinds of things. And the nurses said, well, we didn't order any formula because there have been no premature births since the lockdown started. And he was like, what? There's always a predictable number of premature births. So he started calling other doctors in other hospitals in Europe, in the US, and it hasn't been published as a scientific study, but in most of these hospitals, early birth is down 90% since the
What?
lockdown. Right?
The reason being that pregnant women are more relaxed and they don't feel,
I
is that,
think.
yeah.
There's not as much. We're not traveling around as much. We don't have to keep the same hours. We sleep more according to our biological clocks than we used to be able to. We're around the people that we love generally. Those of us who are lucky enough to be quarantined with people we love. And sudden infant death syndrome is the other thing that's down. So, and nobody really knows the causality, but just the lockdown itself seems to have done this. And that really speaks to our biology and how we evolved to live. And
Absolutely
it's not the way we've been
fascinating.
living.
That is incredible. It's so interesting to see. I mean, again, like you said, definitely I am privileged. I am lucky to not be sick and not have anybody I know that's sick, or at least very close to me sick. And in a situation where my wife's still able to work from home and now I'm back to work. But like just the ability to pause and to sort of reevaluate life and the importance of work and the importance of art and the importance of family and the importance
Hmm.
of breaks and just resting and just sitting in silence and being able to just like
Yeah.
listen to yourself for a moment. It's like
Yeah.
I haven't done that for years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's almost a gift in some ways.
Oh, yeah. When you say you're back to work, what do you have to do for the machine?
I deal poker at a casino.
Really?
I do. And we're the only poker room in the East Coast that's back to work. And there's plexiglass and hand sanitizer and all that and face masks to protect everyone. But yeah, that's my
Well, that
gig.
sounds fun. Have you hustled it yet? Have you
I
sold it to the machine and lost your joy in it?
I have been back and forth. When I like the first like 3 or 4 years I did it, I loved it. And then there was a
Mm,
period where I hated it, but that I think had
mm,
to do a lot with life and
yeah,
just like other stuff in life going on and me using, going to work and being begrudgingly like kind of hating it. And
yeah,
actually, I really, really dreaded going back to work after 3 months of lockdown, just because
hmm,
it was so great. But it's like almost like I was able to reset and find that balance just in my own head that it doesn't
yeah,
feel like I'm going into the machine. And I find myself smiling under my face mask at work and like talking
brilliant.
to customers and actually enjoying it. I don't know if that will last forever, but right now I have a good balance. So I think that's why I like it.
That's fantastic, and you bring up such a good point, which is it's not even as much what we're doing as how we're doing it.
Hmm.
And th- back to the whole idea of the way our art gets trapped in the pyramid. If you do something that you love and you're good at it because you love it, one of the failure modes is that people lock it in and say, you're good at that. You've got to use it to earn money in the pyramid. And then for a while it's joyful and then you lose your joy. And there are a million movies about like rock stars who have done this. And they go from, you know, being free and countercultural and loving their music to being, you know, attacked and mobbed and forced to produce too much and needing drugs to either calm down or get up for the show, and they end up little husks of themselves. It's a really common pattern. So have you ever heard Boyd Vardy's podcast Track Your Life?
No.
This is a dear friend of mine in South Africa, and I he taught me a little bit about his great mastery of animal tracking.
Can you spell his last name?
V as in vegetable,
Hmm.
Arty, Boyd
Okay.
Varty, and he does a podcast called Track Your Life from the wilderness of South Africa. And together we like to talk about how finding your path through life is exactly like tracking an animal. You have to find what lights you up and what you're looking for, like the footprint or the scuff mark on the tree that you'd find from an animal. If you're tracking your life, you're looking for the sensation of joy in the body. So what you just felt when you said you almost felt high, that's a hot track. That's something where you look at it and you go, oh, that's my real self. That
Mm.
animal passed here. And then we take people tracking as part of our like life coaching seminars. And what happens is that if the animal goes straight for a few yards, a person will decide the animal is going that way. But the animal will make a right turn. I mean, look at dogs sniffing their way through a forest. They don't go in straight lines. And people get lost over and over again. They lose the track. And that's like your whole thing with poker. It's a hot track. It's a hot track. Oh, I have to do this for the rest of my life. No, your passion may change. And part of living by nature instead of by culture, and you're doing this, I'm not criticizing, but for your listeners out there, just know something can be right for a while, and then something totally different can be right for a while. But the feeling of joy in your body will not lie to you.
Mm.
And it's a huge thing to say, I'm going to abandon the entire infrastructure of this global domination system, and I'm going to trust the way I feel when I think about puppies. But try it, it works.
It does. I think one of the
Yeah.
other key things for me that I decided to do a couple years ago was, and I've talked about this on the podcast, was not define myself as a poker dealer and truly living by that. Like, so when somebody asks me
Right.
what I do, I say I have an art podcast and I'm a writer and I also
Right.
deal poker. So like not defining myself, but like truly believing that as well, not just saying that, but like saying it
Right.
enough that I truly believe that that's not my identity, which I don't believe it is. It's just kind of what I do. And
Right.
then you can find that joy in the time that you spend at your job. I think that
Yeah.
was helpful for me at least.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that you didn't say I am this. You said I do this, which is
Hmm.
so key. There was one study on weight loss where some people were just asked, some people went on diets, and other people were simply asked to stop using the verb to be in any form. So, no, I am, I was, I will be. they had to say things like they couldn't say I'm fat. They had to say my body is carrying weight or something. And they ended up losing more weight than the control group or the dieting group, just because
Wow.
they stopped using the word to be. And because that's part of the trap. The moment you say I am this and you define yourself, you're stuck in the pyramid. But you've learned not to do that, and it's brilliant. It's a
Mm.
really good trick to just never say you are anything. Just use process, not goal.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to The Secret too, which I am not sure that I fully buy into it. Like I have one foot in it and one foot out of it.
Me
But one
too.
thing that I really, one thing that I definitely agree with is like the affirmations, and I think it's really
Yeah.
important, if not affirmations, to just write down your goals, but like to do it
Hmm.
in that present tense where you say, "I am wealthy." Like instead of "I will be wealthy in 5 years," like
Right.
I am, because it's like all part of the process. I find that that definitely helps too, to feel like you encompass your goals already.
Yeah. I absolutely. I've found the same thing. And it used to drive me crazy because I think that so much of the new age patter around that is inane and bizarre, but it kept working for me, which made me crazy. Like, but I over time I learned that the difference between, because a lot of people say, I'm going to do the secret. I'm going to be wealthy just by sitting in my underwear and imagining it. And for them, it doesn't happen. But for me, it did. And so, what do I
Hmm.
say? And what I finally realized, and this is a book that I just wrote, is it comes down to, are you being true to yourself? And I use the word integrity because it means to be one thing, like an airplane in structural integrity. All the parts are working together. So it's not a moral issue. It's just, is the part of you that goes to the old poker feeling as calm and happy as the part of you that plays with your wife and your dogs? Are you being one person at all times? Are you serving your heart at all times? And when I do that, the things I imagine come into my reality with so much magical improbability. And when I'm out of that, I can work like a dog and nothing ever works for me. So the magic depends on integrity. And then the secret actually really, really works.
Well, before we let you go, and this actually is a pretty good segue into this question that I wanted to ask you, because it's my favorite movie, it's my favorite book, and I've heard you talk about reading Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could just quickly tell that story about, or not quickly, but tell that story about just like kind of the events leading up to you reading that book.
Right. So, yeah, that's when I started writing my what ultimately became my first memoir. I was in the middle of my doctorate, working. I was teaching. I was an assistant professor, but also doing research and writing. I had three little kids. I had this disease. Everything was really super hard.
And hectic.
Yeah, and for my doctorate, I mean, I'm really privileged to have an amazing education, but it meant reading like 6,000 pages of material a week.
Oh
And
my God.
yeah, it was intense. And then I was in therapy because I was so miserable about all of this. And one day my therapist said to me, I was talking about how I hadn't got through the reading for that week, and she said, "When was the last time you read a book for fun?" And I was like, I looked at her as if from a far planet. And I was like, I don't, is that a thing? And then I remembered my childhood, which I spent reading for fun. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a thing. And I went to the grocery store on my way home and I bought a paperback copy of Jurassic Park. It was the first novel I'd bought in like 10 years. And I was exhausted. I was so sleep deprived. I went home, I did my stuff, I put my kids to bed, I opened Jurassic Park and read all night and got up in the morning full of energy because it fed me so richly. Who would have thought that book, Jurassic Park, if I were to look at all the books that have changed my life, you know, the Tao Te Ching, like How to Win Friends and Influence People. Nope, Jurassic Park. And the reason is that he was having so much fun. And Michael
Mhm.
Crichton was at Harvard Medical School, and he got all the symptoms of recurring remitting MS. And at that point, he realized, I don't want to do this. And he started writing books for fun. So he shifted. He got out of the pyramid and into the pool because he got sick. And I was sick. I was clinging to the pyramid with my fingernails. But when I read that book, I let go. And I just said, this is pure fun. And I want to write books that people read for fun. And it was the pivot point of my entire career. Even though, my financial success as a writer didn't come until years later, from that point, I was out of the pyramid and in the pool. So find a book to read for fun, and then just do things that make you feel that way, and hang in there and have faith that this is ultimately going to provide for you and your family better than the monster that eats people and then poops them out the other side.
Oh man, see that's a perfect way to end. I just so agree, and it's so easy in this hustle culture, like we've been talking about, like to even like the things that you read, the stuff that you take in, everything that you consume is geared towards this goal of whatever, of progressing or of learning or education, and all that stuff is so important. And if you can find stuff that feeds both animals, the knowledge as well as the joy and the fun, that's great.
Yeah.
But it is okay to take breaks. It is okay to give yourself that
Yes.
joy and that breathing in. It's so important, and something that a lot of us lose sight of. I've definitely lost sight of it. I've advised people on the podcast before, just hustle, 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 and find those microseconds. But it's so important to just relax and be a human being that can enjoy life.
Yeah, like stop hustling and see what happens. The only thing more intelligent than the culture in your life is your nature, but you have to give it a chance.
Martha Beck, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate your time, and whether you're talking to me or you're on your own podcasts or your YouTube channel. Oh, The Gathering Room. We didn't even talk about that. Everybody's got to watch The Gathering Room on your YouTube channel. We'll link it all up. But you're just such a constant source of inspiration to me and to everybody else, and you are just a light in the world. And I thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Same back at you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, Martha, thank you again, and we will see you maybe in a few years.
or sooner. I mean, I love our
sooner.
Conversation, and
Okay.
I love what you're doing and what you stand for. So anytime, I'm at your service.
Okay, we'll do it sooner then.
Thank you so much.
Hugest thank you to Martha once again for coming on the show. There is nothing else I want to say. I don't want to summarize anything. I don't want to add any more words, because I feel like the more words I add at the end of the episode will devalue this amazing episode. The only thing I will say is we're unworthy. We're unworthy. And I will also direct you towards my YouTube video. Of course, you can watch the one on scheduling, but I feel like taking Martha's advice to heart. This week, I created a video that's much more in line with how I feel. And it's the only 3 rules you need to know about making art, and it's all based off of this seashell piece of art that my nieces gave to me. That's the solar system, and what that can teach you about making art that matters most to you. If you want to get to that video, you can head to yourcreativepush.com/shell, SHELL, and that will take you right to YouTube, and you can watch that. It's only a few minutes. And other than that, marthabeck.com to check out Martha and everything she's got going on. She's always got a lot of different programs and books and videos out for you to consume. They all seem to talk about something different, and they all seem to get right to the heart of what ails us and what we need to hear. So I just can't get enough of Martha Beck, and again, just super honored that she would take the time to come on the show and have such nice things to say about the show. But that's all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired. I know you were, so go get to work, go make some amazing art, and we will see you next week if you need that push again. And as always, remember that the universe needs your creations, and you are the universe. We'll see you next time. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to subscribe to YCP on your favorite podcast app. Or better yet, join the newsletter, where you'll get each week's episode, YouTube video, inspirational resources, and a sneak peek at the following week's guest, all in one weekly email. Again, that's yourcreativepush.com/subscribe.